everybody. Hello, welcome. Hi, I'm Emily Ramshaw. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the 19th, and we are so happy to have you all with us for our annual 19th Represent Summit, so welcome. So this is our first ever event in Chicago, and we are so excited to be here with all of you. And thank you for being here, and also everyone watching along at home. We're so thrilled to have you. For those of you in the room, we are live streaming this whole program this afternoon. On a personal note, my whole family hails from the south side of Chicago, and I went to Northwestern University. So the purple you see in the 19th logo is also Northwestern purple. That was not intentional, but I think subliminal. All right, so today we are talking about economic mobility, what it means to seek an economy that works for everyone. We have financial experts with us, advocates, community leaders. We're going to be talking today about the systemic barriers to economic mobility and how individuals and communities can work together to overcome them. So we're going to have keynote conversations today. There will be breakout skills sessions. We have incredible performances. And if you're here with us in the room in Chicago, we will, of course, end the day with a reception. Before we begin, I wanted to thank those who made this week possible, including our founding sponsors, the National Women's Law Center and the Stardust Fund, and our supporting sponsors, the Barbara Lee Family Foundation and the Tory Burch Foundation. We'd also like to thank our national media partner, the Washington Post, as well as our local media partners, Block Club Chicago, CityCast Chicago, City Bureau, and the Chicago Independent Media Alliance. So lots of media friends here. Thanks, y'all. And finally, we have to thank our academic partner, my alma mater, and our gracious host today, Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. Thank you to Dean Whitaker, Belinda Clark, and the rest of the Medill team. We're able to put on events like this in Chicago because of their generosity, so thank you all so much. Yes, absolutely. All right, now I'd like to invite one of our founding sponsors and one of my favorite human beings, Luana Kimbrough, to the stage. Luana's the managing director of the Stardust Fund, and she's just gonna come up and say a few words. So come on up, Luana. Be careful with that beautiful dress on this stage.
I know. Oh my goodness, oh happy day. Oh, happy day. Y'all are lucky that I only have a couple of minutes because I break out into song or into interpretive dance. But I hope you can feel, the energy and enthusiasm vibrating off of me. I'm so deeply honored to be here. And I am going to invoke some ancestors. I'm a Black woman from the South, so we speak in sermons and soliloquies. So I'll try to be brief, but I won't promise that. But the first ancestor I'm going to invoke is Maya Angelou. She says, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And I bring such love, praise, and greetings from the Stardust family and our intrepid, amazing president, Molly Gotchman, who is a big lover and supporter of Emily and also understood the vision of what the 19th set out to do and how it's been democratizing rooms, centering the stories of those impacted, and telling stories like mine. And so I bring love and greeting from them, but I'm really here to give Emily her flowers, right? The work of the Stardust Fund is the joy of my life because I get to invest in intrepid leaders doing the yeoman's work of liberatory justice. Come on now. Can I get an amen, somebody? And building out equitable futures. And so if you can indulge me, I'm gonna invoke another ancestor. And it's befitting that we're in Chicago, because I'm gonna invoke Ida B. Wells. And where is Erin? Let the church say amen. Let the church say amen. And I hope I quote her well, but Miss Ida said that the way you right wrongs is to shine light on the truth. Okay, can I get an amen? The 19th is not just about truth-telling and sharing light. They are about something even more important. And so if you indulge me one more time, I'm going to invoke another ancestor, Toni Morrison. Come on now. Come on now. Do y'all remember when Toni Morrison won the Nobel Prize? And she gave that great interview where she talked about the importance of centering our stories. Yeah, right? You remember she said, I went to the border and claimed it as the center, right? And waited for the world to meet me where I was. That's the spirit of the 19th. And that is why we are so honored to be founding partners and to stand shoulder to shoulder with these intrepid leaders daring greatly in their arena. It is the joy of my life to do this work, and it is the joy, personal joy, to be able to give you your flowers in front of this group. Bless you.
All right, well, we have a new MC for the afternoon. Thank you so much, Luana. As you all can imagine, it's been a total gift to get to work with Luana and the folks at the Stardust Fund. Before we begin today, a couple of housekeeping notes. First, a quick reminder that while sponsors help to keep the 19th Represents free for all viewers to attend, they don't play any part in the event programming. Second, if you're posting online today during the summit, please tag us. Our handle basically everywhere is 19th News. And with that, we are going to get started. So leading our first conversation today is Karen Hawkins, a Chicagoan and story editor for the 19th. Please welcome Karen and her amazing panelists to the stage.
Emily, thank you, Luana. I love the way that you said that, Emily, the Karen and her amazing panel, because it makes us sound like a girl group. Let's do this. All right, so I'm going to introduce these brilliant humans, and then we're going to jump into it, because I only have a half an hour with them, and I'm going to incorporate your questions, too. So if you have questions out in the live stream and here in the audience, we're going to incorporate those, too. So I will start with Felicia Davis, who is the president and CEO of the Chicago Foundation for Women. Please hold your applause till the end. Andrea Saenz. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Alyssa, you're next. Hi. Court, who is author of Bootstrapped, Liberating Ourselves from the American Dream. Why do I not have my glasses on? Andrea Saenz, president of the Chicago Community Trust. And Brandy Kanazi, commissioner of the Department of Family and Support Services for Chicago. Let's give them a hand for being here. I already told them we're the best panel, no offense. Okay, so Andrea, I'm going to start with you. So the Chicago Community Trust recently commissioned this financial survey of Cook County residents. What were some of the findings that struck you?
So we partnered with an organization called the Financial Health Network, and they've been doing a national survey to understand the financial health of Americans generally for the last several years. And they define financial health as, being able to pay your bills on time, having enough savings to get through a crisis, and finally being able to plan for the future. And across all of these dimensions, what we found was not surprising because of Chicago's history of segregation and continued legacy of that severe segregation, that in Chicago, Black and Latino people are much less likely to be financially healthy, not only than their white counterparts in Chicago and Cook County, but also than their counterparts nationally. And that the difference between Black and Latino financial health in Chicago compared to white financial health in Chicago is much broader than nationally, right? So we know that across the country, if you're Black or brown, you're less likely to be financially healthy than you are if you're white. That's true in Chicago, but in a much more severe way. And one of the things that we've been working on are all of the different ways that we can help build wealth in Latino and Black communities with the understanding that it's really wealth versus income alone that's gonna help us close the gap and get to a better outcome for everybody. Because one of the really scary findings was that even at $100,000 annual income and more, so Black and Latino Chicagoans that are making over $100,000 a year, compared to their white counterparts, are still much less likely to be financially healthy and much more likely to be financially vulnerable. And that's because often to get to that point, to that level of income, they're going into tremendous debt for education, and they're often the only ones in their family to have attained that level of income. So also much more likely to be supporting siblings, parents, cousins, friends, as they've gotten to that level of income. So just so much work to do in Chicago and Cook County. Again, not different from the rest of the country in terms of the patterns, but just much more severe here.
Thank you so much for that. And I will say, kind of the arc I'm hoping to build here is defining this problem and then talking about some solutions. So in case you're feeling depressed after that first answer, don't worry. I'm going to ask these brilliant humans also about more solutions as Andrea got to them. So
I
Alyssa-
remain optimistic with all
Thank
that
you.
said. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, you're doing amazing work. So, all right, Alyssa, so your book, you really interrogate this myth of rugged individuality, that Americans pull themselves up by the bootstraps alone, and that's how they do it. Why are we so attached to this notion, and what harm does it do?
Yeah, so hi, everybody. It's great to be here, by the way. Love Chicago. You, Stardust Lady, amazing. Amazing. I mean, so we have this story in America, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And if anybody has ever tried to do that, you'd have to be Simone Biles to be able to, pull yourself. You can't do it. You can't do it. And that is a myth that has existed for generations, starting in the 19th century and intensified partially to kind of cover up a lie about the labor of enslaved people, the work of women, and the appropriation of indigenous land. So to me, that story begins with, there's a con at the center of our story. And when Andrea was just saying this about the $100,000 number, I was thinking about how we have this idea that keeps being pushed upon us. You can see it in Trump. You can see it in other people as well, though they're closer to us politically, that there's the deserving rich, and that if people are struggling, there's something wrong with them. When you have, generations of not having home ownership because of redlining, you have generations of women who couldn't even have bank accounts, you have land that was given away to white people in the 19th century and not to anyone else. You have a GI Bill that mostly served white men. And so I think part of what I'm trying to do with Bootstrapped, and also the organization I run called the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, is to try to tell a different set of stories around this, and we'll get to that. But yeah, there you go.
Oh, is my mic? All right. Hello, Brandy, I will come to you. So tell us about the work of the Chicago Department of Family and Support Services, and how does it touch, I've seen you talk about how it touches almost every household in Chicago. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So at the Chicago Department of Family and Support Services, we really work to serve the most vulnerable in the city. And so we do everything from early learning programs, youth programs, to summer jobs, as well as youth who were in justice involved, as well as workforce development and senior services and homeless. I keep saying and so the real goal is whether we are working with 350 nonprofit partners on behalf of the city or the 28 sites where we provide direct services, we're helping people who are vulnerable and in need get that touch and support that they need. One of the things that we know is prior to the pandemic in 2019, 19% of Chicagoans were living in poverty, right? And 44% of Chicagoans could not pay their bills and meet their basic needs, and that was pre-pandemic times. So when you think about families having to choose, when you think about a senior having to choose between medication or food or sending a child to school, it really impacts their economic mobility. One of the things that we found is it's really important to be innovative. I think people think about government and they think, wow, they're just really stuck in the ancient, it's really hard to turn a ship. And so we've been able to do a pilot program, the Chicago Resilient Communities Pilot, where we really work to look at what is the value of cash, right? How can cash change an individual's life? And so we started this pilot. We selected 5,000 people to receive $500 a month for a year. We're coming at the end of that pilot project, and I think it's just been really impactful. The goal really was to be efficient. It was to think about how do we make sure that we give people agency. So many times we make poor people prove that they're poor. You have to demonstrate, oh, bring me this piece of paper, show me that you earn this much money. And that's really re-traumatizes people because they already feel ashamed, right? And so you want to give people the dignity that they need back. On the first day the pilot launched, we received 76,000 applications, right? We received over the course of 3 weeks, 176,000. And so what did that signal to me? It signaled that the need is great. Yesterday, we were just having a conversation with one of the researchers and we were going through the photo vlog. When you think about the need, someone sent a picture of their dinner and their note was, I can finally have fresh vegetables and my whole family at the table. That is so basic, that is so humane, right? Another woman showed a picture of her washing her hair and she said, my hair is not falling out anymore because I'm not worried about how I'm gonna pay my bills. And so just the power of cash and giving people agency, it not only changes their economic situation, but it also changes their physical health and their mental health because you're not worrying about how do I catch a little bit of breathing room. People just want a little bit of breathing room in order to figure things out. And so that's just one of the ways of how we're being creative and innovative and trying to give people back dignity in their life.
Thank you, and thank you for setting us up so well. Thank you for setting us up so well. For the question for Felicia, thank you. So why is it so important to invest in women and girls?
This is a great question, and I joked, if I can't answer this question, then I need to be out of my job, because it's our actual mission. And part of it is, the population, the women and girls represent at least half. So before COVID, because the numbers haven't been updated, and we've had there was a lot of death during COVID, women were more than half of the population. So there are a couple of things that happen when you invest in women and girls. When you invest in a woman, you invest in her, in the entire community, because she will take what she knows and she will bring it back to the community for the liberation of everyone. And she teaches children, and she anchors her community in a way, because honestly, what happens every single day in communities, and if where you're from is anything like Chicago with 77 communities, if you look on the ground, what you will see are some fierce women. I call them Miss Jenkins and Miss Jones as a composite because they're there. They have been on those blocks, they have been in the neighborhood, they have made sure that babies go to school, that they've circled around younger women to say, hey baby, you don't know this, but let me show you this. They have opened up a wealth of information. And so I think that when you invest in women, our mission statement says at Chicago Foundation for Women, we invest in women and girls as catalysts for better communities for all. And that truly is what happens when you invest in, whether that's educate, housing, providing safety, whatever it is, when you invest a job, living wages, other benefits, when you do that, you actually really do start to change the fabric of our communities in a much more, and it's actually much more equitable, because women, when we get things, we're actually much more equitable about distributing those things to the community, and I think all of my co-panelists touched on that in part.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, I want to encourage y'all to send in questions and we'll have time for you to ask them, of course, at the end. So this part of the conversation, I'm going to drop this question and then I'm going to sit back. That's my goal, is for y'all to talk, so you don't have to wait for me to ask the next one. Get into it. So how do you ensure that the people who are most impacted, who need the most resources, have a say in how those resources are allocated?
So I'll start. One of the things we do is make sure that people sitting at the table when we're making decisions, as people with lived experience and living experiences, are part of the conversation. We cannot tell communities what they need. The other thing is really about making sure that we have the right mix. We bring a lot of philanthropy together, as well as aldermen. I think that's just really important to understand what is the fabric of the community. There are two things that we're doing right now that I'm really proud of. One is our anchor orgs of their creating community plans in 19 communities across the city to address youth programming. And so it's not us coming in and saying, this is how your community should be led, but actually allowing them to create a community plan that they will actually implement and demonstrate. The other thing that we're doing is actually micro grants, of allowing organizations to choose how do you distribute money in your community to solve your own problem. The third thing is just our young people, of investing in them in the pandemic. we saw just young people just really being upset by what they saw with the civil unrest and not being able to come out. And so we have the Chicago Youth Service Corps, where it's a civic leadership program, and our young people are actually saying, this is what I see, and I'm gonna solve the problem, and we pay them as their work study job to actually do that year round. And I think that changes because you build a healthier community, then you start to change the vibe of that community and make sure that we're changing the culture of Chicago.
I'll jump in. And I'll say, so some of the ways we do that at the foundation, I mean, the most fundamental way is to listen and to show up. You may be surprised at some organizations that actually don't go into the community. They don't interface with the people that they are trying to support. So you actually have to show up, and you have to show up with a sense of cultural humility and understand you don't know what you don't know, and you have to honor people's lived experience. So that's fundamental. You have to show up and you have to listen, because the people who are closest to the problem are also closest to the challenges, and they actually understand what they need. And too often there is this belief that communities of challenge, or where there is a challenging situations in communities, people assume then there are no resources in that community. There is wisdom. There is always wisdom in the room, and there is wisdom in those communities that actually, if listened to and heeded, could actually have a significant impact. So I think those are a couple of things. And then the other thing from our standpoint at CFW is we bring the community to the table to help us with our grant making. It's a really important part. They do site visits. We have non-board members on all of our committees, so we do this participatory grant making. We host everyday women and giving councils and circles, and we support them, and we teach them the tools around philanthropy, because we believe every one of us is a philanthropist. You do not have to be the short, fat, white guy on the Monopoly box. Like, we all are philanthropists, right? All the ways in which we're giving back. And I think Andrea alluded to this today, too, because sometimes it shows up as sending your cousin, nephew, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, whoever, to school, right? Sometimes it shows up in mutual aid. It shows up in a lot of different ways. But that, in communities of color, it's always been there, but because our names aren't on buildings, or our pictures or plaques or bronze busts, it doesn't mean that type of work isn't also equally important.
And to say, I've been working in Chicago for a couple of decades now, and it's really just in the last few years that I feel so fortunate to be working in partnership. Really, if you look around with women like Felicia and Brandy, and like so many leaders of our large philanthropic institutions, our large community service organizations, are women, not only women, but a lot of women, a lot of them that really come from so many of the communities that we're engaging all the time, and that makes a big difference. I feel like for so long, people have finally bought this notion that diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, diversity of background makes a business function better. And now we're seeing that in the social sector in Chicago, this idea that like all of these different perspectives are creating better outcomes. And it's the outcomes that matter most, right? We don't want to do this kind of inclusive thing as window dressing. We want to do it because it really drives change. And I'll just share one example. The Chicago Community Trust, in the middle of the COVID crisis, we were in partnership with the United Way in Chicago to oh my God, I'm forgetting, to raise money, this very basic word, to raise money for direct relief during COVID. And so we were able to pull together a fund and, put money out to organizations on the ground that were providing food, were providing, PPE, were providing all of this stuff. And in the middle of that thinking, we realized that those same communities, primarily Southwest Side immigrant communities, were gonna be hardest hit by the economic effects of the pandemic, and so created a fund called We Rise Together to also then invest in economic revitalization in those neighborhoods towards the tail end of the pandemic. It's been about a year and a half, and we've spent $30 million so far and supported projects, real estate projects. So these are really complicated. Real estate projects in neighborhoods hardest hit by the pandemic. And our criteria at the very top, like we wouldn't even consider the project, if it wasn't endorsed by the community, the neighborhood itself, and it wasn't part of the community's quality of life plan, and it wasn't something that folks in the neighborhood themselves said, this is what we need. We want to build this health clinic, cafe, whatever, sports facility. It's been a variety of different kinds of things. But really, you know, we knew that it was much more likely to get built, to get used, to be effective as a tool for economic development because the folks in the neighborhood themselves had put their own kind of blood, sweat, and tears into building the plan and getting it done. So far, out of the 30 in just 18 months that we've invested in, 8 have opened their doors, and it's been amazing. Like the small businesses around those neighborhoods are doing well. We've been tracking, we partnered with MasterCard, and we've been tracking economic activity in the neighborhood since before the opening towards the end, and it's spiking and it's kind of going up every weekend. And so for me, it's just like the smart thing to do. Not only is it the morally right thing to do, but the smart thing to do to invest in projects that really have ownership from folks in the community. And now we're seeing so much more innovation come out of that, and I know you're gonna like this, worker-owned co-ops. So businesses that we can build in neighborhoods where the money, the profits of that business are going to go back into the workers themselves, that they're the ones who are going to benefit from it. So it just feels like we're at the very beginning of finally busting this myth that people, just because they live in communities that have low economic resources, aren't capable of creating vibrant organizations, creating vibrant businesses, and are not worthy of like increased investment. And I feel like that's where we need to keep pushing and using storytelling to change people's mindsets about what's possible when you really invest in people, no matter where they went to college or whatever, all the stupid things that we filter out good ideas from.
So I feel like everybody here is saying these incredible things, kind of the equivalent of UBI, Universally Basic Income. And what you're saying about informants in the community actually holding the wisdom, and what you're saying about the worker co-ops and, buy-ins. And I agree with all that. One thing I saw when I was reporting my book, Bootstrapped, was I saw these worker cooperatives where people had so much, like the ones in Chicago, Chai Fresh, they had so much energy for their work, and they wanted to learn QuickBooks. They wanted to learn accounting. They didn't want to just be, entry level. They owned their labor, and that to me was that's part of the project of freeing ourselves from the lie of the American dream and towards a new one, which is going to be closer to the one from 1931, which was our American dream, not my American dream. And I feel like everybody here is talking about the kind of we-ness, and that's part of the project. But for us at Economic Hardship Reporting Project, which I built up with the great Barbara Ehrenreich, who said that philanthropists, the poor are the philanthropists of this country. Exactly what you said. And that, in fact, they're holding up the rich people. They're holding them up. I see an editor from our nonprofit, Debbie Lee. Hi, Debbie. But one of the things we do is we are getting people who are lower income to write, financially struggling, I prefer that word. Sometimes they don't want to be called lower income. Financially struggling to write about their own experience and then force it into the mainstream media. So that's the idea. So the idea is that people reading the Washington Post, or they're reading Esquire, or they're reading Refinery 29, and they're like, oh, I'm looking for lips. Oh, this is a story of struggle, first person, really moving with some answers, Someone experiencing homelessness with an idea for how to redesign a homeless shelter. That's an actual person that we work with. Somebody who is a former vet with PTSD, living in an SRO, who talked about performance politics with the VA to get his benefits. So up here, you start to get a little aphasic. Anyway, but yeah, so looking for the benefits. And but it's also people like Ray Suarez, who was an amazing newsman, you guys may have heard of, PBS, who fell on hard times. And we wanted to support him and bring him back to the greatness that he is, and we've been sort of supporting his work. And he said this amazing thing, which a lot of media is by the rich, for the middle class, about the poor. And our ideal at EHRP, and my ideal in this book, is to try to kind of show other kinds of stories and to disrupt that so-called natural order of how the media is supposed to operate.
Thank you all so much. You ran with that question so beautifully. Thank you. All right, we have a question from a viewer. All right, if you could pick only one, what is the single most effective policy or tool that could advance economic mobility in Chicago?
Okay. I would choose housing. Affordable housing in Chicago and around the country is just so hard for many people. And I think when you can know that your housing situation is taken care of, people can focus on other parts of their life. They can focus on finding a job, going back to school, taking care of their family. But when you don't know where you're going to sleep at night, when you are wondering if you're going to be sleeping on a bench or in a shelter, I think that just creates so much tension. And so my tool that I would fight for is housing for all.
Right now, the moment that we're in, since Brandy's already handled housing, I am going to tackle childcare, because for women, this continues to be, there are many more childcare deserts than there were pre-COVID. We had a bright, shining moment in this country when the President of the United States really heralded childcare as essential infrastructure. But we also saw some people lose their minds at the suggestion of that, right? I was speaking for Women's Day at a corporation, and someone asked me, like, why? Like, what's the big deal? Like, why should we have childcare? And I didn't want to lose it, right? I didn't want to, like, But, and I explained, because from a human standpoint, whatever you believe about whether or not women should work, let's put that aside. Let's look at the child. Yeah. Let's look at the humanity of this child and what we actually know about what it takes to have children grow up to be success, and what it means to have a 1,000,000-word gap, and what it means to have socialization, and what it means, right? All of those things, which are actually just good for that human. And so from a human-centered standpoint, childcare works. We've seen it time and time again. And so today, right now, a lot of the economic pressures that are being pushed on women is really around the lack and the paucity of childcare. And while I'm on that, I would say we need to increase the payments and the salary. We need to increase the reimbursements. We need to increase the salaries. We need to increase that whole infrastructure so that the overwhelmingly women in the workforce of childcare providers are actually being able to take care of their own families and their own children in an equitable way.
Since Brandy has housed everyone and Felicia has made sure all our children have care, I will go beyond the bare necessities, and I'll say the policy I would create is something akin to what Derek Hamilton from New School has called baby bonds, which means every child born in Chicago gets an investment account in their name at birth. And that grows. So by the time everyone's 18, they have some assets. And they can do something with those assets. They can go to college. They can help with the home. They have assets. So going beyond the bare necessities and saying everybody needs some sort of money that is not necessarily tied to their income and their ability to earn, that they can do something with to get through a crisis, to invest in their future, whatever.
So I'm going to go beyond the housing, below bond, I don't know, outside. And I'm just going to say we do need better media. We need better media that's not just coastal. 73% of the new sites are on the coasts, and 27% for the rest of the country. And I think we really need to have people telling their own stories, especially in places like Chicago. It's an amazing city. I can see what people getting to tell their own stories can do, and I do believe in hearts and minds. I say empathy is my metric. So, and then people also can start to care about themselves, too, when they start to see these stories out there. So there you go.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for just one question in the room. I'm so sorry. This has flown by. If you have a burning, on fire question, please raise your hand. These brilliant people know? Oh,
back there.
all right, in the back there.
Yeah.
Yes, it's you. Hello. I will repeat that question and let me know if I don't do it justice. What's working in terms of economic mobility?
Is this to me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's to me. Oh, let me think about this, really. What's working? Well, there is a lot. So in Chicago, there was a lot of work that really has changed some of our communities for the better and really empowered women and increased economic mobility and economic security. Workforce, but we do, okay, I still want to focus on the positive. So there are a number of programs that are continuing to, and the combination, what seems to work the best is when it's kind of like a wraparound approach, very holistic, so that one doesn't have to go to get the things at 5 different places. They can get all the things kind of in one place, in their community, ideally, so that they can get, you know, workforce training, childcare, credit recovery, all of the, you know, a lot of the other re-entry services, as well as perhaps getting a record, expungement services. Those types of models, really those holistic models, are the ones that seem to work well. There is place-based work that we're doing in the Inglewood community. It's called the Inglewood Women's Initiative. There is place-based work that my friend Ruby Bright seated down in Memphis at the Memphis Women's Fund, and anchor-based in a community with all those aspects. Those things work well.
I'll add one quick thing that's just easy. The City Colleges of Chicago has partnered with several corporations to create an apprenticeship program for people that, for entry-level jobs in large corporations with lots of opportunity for upward mobility, jobs that used to only go to people with BAs from like the top 10 schools in the country. And the companies found that there was just so much attrition at that entry level because those folks wanted to move on quickly to do the next thing, that they created these special programs for 2-year degree people with city colleges. I think there are about 4,000 people in those kinds of jobs now. And many of them who started early days in that program have moved up now into really high quality jobs with lots of support and lots of professional growth opportunities. And I think that there are about 4,000 or so such apprenticeships right now in Chicago. And if we could just put a 0 on that, another 0 on that number, I think we'd be in really good shape as a city.
All right, y'all, we are getting the stop sign.
Oh, no.
I know, I can't believe it either. Thank you so much for your time. Please thank these folks. Thank you. This was lovely. All right, we are going to make room for the amazing Serena Henderson, who is our membership manager, who is going to speak to you all about 19th membership. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Can we give another round of applause for Karen and our panelists? Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Serena Henderson. I am the membership manager at the 19th, and I'm so happy to see all of your faces here today. And I would love to tell you more about how you can support our nonprofit newsroom. But first, can we take one big group selfie? Is that okay? But first, did you get a program? Can you hold it and wave it in the air for me? And then on the count of 3, we're gonna say the 19th. 1, 2, 3. The 19th. Beautiful. Okay, thank you. On the back of that program, you'll see a link to our membership page, 19thnews.org/donate. Also on the screen, there should be a QR code as well. If you want to show your support for our newsroom and our free event, go to 19thnews.org today and make a donation before our event ends. Your donation will allow us to host more free events like this one. Every gift counts. If you aren't able to make a donation today, please consider supporting the 19th with your time instead. After today's program, we're conducting short interviews with attendees to learn about their experiences so that we can continue to create journalism with and for you. We have special swag bags for those who participate. Just sign up at the information booth. There's Alexandra and Shabeli and Abby. Give them a wave. And we can't wait to chat with you. Thanks again for being here and for supporting all of us at the 19th. Now, I'm happy to invite Naira Ikoro to share some of their poetry with us. Naira?
Hey, y'all. Hey. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much. How are y'all doing? Y'all look beautiful. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Chima Ikoro. Folks also call me Naira. I'm a poet and an interdisciplinary writer. I'm also the community engagement editor for a newsroom here in Chicago called Southside Weekly. But I'm here, yeah. But I'm here representing Young Chicago Authors, which is the writing nonprofit that I'm a teaching artist at. So I'm gonna share some poems with y'all if that's cool. Okay, cool. But real quick though, if y'all just wanna take a breath with me. Out. Another one in. And out. So I'm gonna perform some pieces. The first one is kind of deep. So yeah, just remember your breathing and things like that as I will be breathing through it too. Sounds good? Beautiful. So this first piece is titled Intersection. There is a body hanging at the intersection of Blackness and womanhood, and it's starting to smell. People have sent complaints to the city, said it's an atrocity. It was easy to ignore when she was first hung, but now her body is breaking down and she leaks onto their head tops and coffee cups during their commute. It's disgusting. Not the fact that she's dead, but that in her death, she has the audacity to command our attention. They are not appalled that she's dead. They are appalled that she's so angry about it. She's not saying anything, but nature is pulling her heart onto her sleeve. It's one thing to die. How dare you have the nerve to bleed? And for that, she is too loud. Her jaw dismembered hangs off the side of her skull. How ironic the citizens of this city have convinced themselves to be offended because she seems to be yelling at them, even though she's clearly screaming for help. All they hear is noise at this intersection. I'm sure she called 911, called a Black man, called a human to see her as such, let out a blood-curdling scream, and the voice on the other line requested she lower her tone. I said, a body got hung up on display at the intersection of Blackness Avenue and Womanhood Boulevard. There's a traffic signal placed over her face, like she had to die for y'all to see the signs, like I had to swing right here for y'all to know when to stop. I said there is a body that got strung up in broad daylight for everyone to see, a human, equal parts Black, equal parts woman. If separated, the human would still be alive. The intersection of Blackness Avenue and Womanhood Boulevard, as busy as it gets, has no traffic signal. So deadly, that intersection, but every so often people stop to marvel at the new body that hangs there, the life that y'all had to see taken in order to slow down and stop running us over for a second until she leaks into your peace and the city takes her down and tosses her out. No one ever called to ask the city to put a traffic signal at that intersection so we could stop getting killed. But they are quick to complain when a dead body ruins their appetite, as if speeding through my identity, with no regard for my existence, didn't scream a thirst for blood, as if pieces of our hair aren't caught in your bumper, as if you didn't know I wasn't just a speed bump when you ran me over and turned me into a figurehead so the world can pretend to care about us and sign petitions to make the intersection of Blackness Avenue and Womanhood Boulevard safer until we stink and get dumped with the rest of our sisters. And a man or a white woman walks past an old bloodstain turned brown on the concrete, an old post, a hashtag, and says, oh yeah, isn't that, oh my gosh, what's her name? And that's that piece. So, just to explain the ending of the poem as well, as some of y'all know, there is a movement or like a hashtag, say her name, and the purpose of that movement is to remind folks to remember the names of Black women who are also victims to violence. Oftentimes our names are, or folks' names are forgotten, and so yeah, just wanted to shed some light on that. So thanks y'all for rocking with me. I'm gonna move to the next poem, okay? Cool. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, cool. So, my students always laugh at me because I'm always like, beautiful, beautiful, all right, let's go. Okay, cool. So this next poem is titled Explorer. I'm first-gen Nigerian American. My parents came to Chicago in the 70s. My dad went to Chicago State University. And so I'm super, super, super South Side, if you can't tell. So yeah, this piece is titled Explorer. My dad says, don't make a U-turn at the intersection. As we leave La Fruteria on Commercial, identified a corner round and worn. Tells me, before he owned a house or had a credit score, a bunch of plainclothes cops in an unmarked car snatched him up and showed him what urban renewal feels like. I don't know how to ask if he was sure those were even cops. A transplant tells me tales of their South Shore escapades as if I'm the one that's new here. I guess I move further north with every apartment, but my mom has only ever lived south, far south. So far, when I moved to Hyde Park, she told my aunt that I lived on the north side. Things are different now, I say, making a U-turn in front of the unmarked Ford Explorer. The license plate says Michigan, and that's that piece. I feel like poetry is so interesting because folks are always like trying to be like super, super, super quiet. But I know that earlier folks talked about, sermons, and I feel like I also speak in sermons as well. So, you can shout me down if you want to, But, but I'm gonna do one last poem if that's cool with y'all. Okay, this piece is titled Growing Uninvited. I grew up in a single-story home with a big basement and a broken doorbell in a neighborhood where my dad wasn't allowed to sell ice cream when he first came to this country. The doorbell broke a long, long time ago and just never got fixed. We weren't the type to receive unexpected company. If you were on the way, we already knew, so it was fine. Here, he would tend the grass and replace the flowers as if required by law, says, in a place like this, your neighbors will notice if your property isn't well kept. I only saw the marigolds and hydrangea bushes for what they were, decoration, shrubbery to hide in or feel protected by or disguised by my mom, twisting her larynx to sound more normal when she asked my neighbors how they're doing. There was this rose bush under my bedroom window, growing in the wrong spot. No matter how many times my dad cut it down, it kept growing back. Isn't there a poem somewhere in here? My parents, standing at this country's front door, the doorbell defunct, not waiting for or wanting any visitors, still multiplying despite missing eviction by a single thorn every month for years. My dad was at the library when my mom went into labor. Who could be mad? A man whose parents couldn't read or write, missing the birth of a daughter who would grow up to multiply her words into weapons that could not be pruned or tended or cut down. I also learned to twist my voice when I'm at our house as well. Instead, I do it to sound more like our home. And that's that piece. Thank you so much. That first panel was beautiful. Y'all talked about a lot of really important stuff. I also forgot to mention that I co-founded a mutual aid organization called Black Rising with some of my friends as a direct response to the pandemic and the uprisings in 2020. And yeah, it's very true. Like, first of all, a lot of the people who were on the megaphones and on the ground were women and non-men and queer folks. And also that, folks didn't know where they were gonna sleep at night after protesting and handing out food and things like that. And so thank y'all for the work that y'all are doing. Y'all look beautiful, and I'm excited to see the rest of the event. Once again, my name is Naira. Bye.
Naira, damn. Thank you so much for sharing your words with us. That was extremely powerful. My name is Tracy Jan. I'm an editor at the Washington Post, and I am here because I would like to have a conversation with British Robinson. British is president and CEO of the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. Last year, British was also named one of Forbes 50 over 50 for impact, a list of social entrepreneurs and change makers helping to make the world a better, more equitable place. I'm gonna lift this up so I don't hunch over. Okay. Are you comfortable? No. We want you to be comfortable.
Okay, thanks.
Don't want to make you feel imprisoned. So we're here to talk about the literacy gap. About 130 million Americans are shut out of employment and economic advancement because they can't read or write with proficiency. I think that's about half of US adults, which was a statistic that surprised me. British, can you please give us an overview of how big the problem is and whether it's getting better or worse?
Great, thanks. So good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. The last panel, I'm going to diverge just for a hot second. The last panel was very sort of Chicago, Illinois focused. So let me just take 2 seconds to ground us in the reality right here in Chicago. Currently in Chicago, you have what we call a low literacy rate of anywhere between 20 and 50%, specifically closer to 50% in Cook County. And that is really a harbinger of really what's going on across these United States. So about 2 years ago, we did the first ever macroeconomic study to inextricably link or to tie or to better understand the connection between low literacy and the economy and our health and wellness and economic mobility and social mobility. So many of the things the previous panel talked about, we believe literacy is inextricably linked to. So to kind of come back up and widen the lens a little bit, today, unfortunately, there are about 130 million Americans in the United States that essentially read below a 6th grade level. It's about 54% of our population, or 1 in 5, those ages 16 to 74. It affects everyone, Black, white, Latino, Hispanic, everyone. It is a national problem. There's no particular geography. It's obviously a bit more exacerbated in the South and the Southeast, and also in our major cities, but also in rural areas. So it's a national problem. You cannot compete with China or Russia or say that you want your city to grow and you want to be prosperous if you have a low literate population, anywhere between 10 to 50%. And when we speak about low literate, we really mean that kind of equivalency of reading below a 6th grade level. We also have about 43 million people in this country that essentially read below a 3rd grade level. 70% of people that are incarcerated in the United States essentially read below a 3rd grade level. So it's an economic issue, it's a social issue, it's a health issue. If you struggle with reading and you're low literate, these are adults we're talking about. This is a multi-generational problem, it's an intergenerational problem. I like to say if mama can't read, baby can't read. We know from an NIH study in the early 2000s that a mother's academic attainment is the single greatest factor in her child's future success in life. Now, families have changed a little bit, so we like to say head of household or caregiver or grandma or auntie. So it's a massive initiative that we need to, a massive problem, but also an opportunity that we need to tackle as a country.
So what is the larger impact of having so many illiterate, basically functionally illiterate Americans, especially on our economy?
So the impact on our economy is significant. So we just kind of coming through COVID, still have COVID. Let's just take health outcomes. So about 70% of people who are low literate in the United States have poor health outcomes. They use emergency rooms more often, and they typically die of preventative diseases simply because they can't read or understand medical protocols or adhere to drugs. For example, about 70 million people couldn't understand basic protocols around COVID. And that just meant not the complicated get your vaccine and all that. It simply meant wear a mask and wash your hands. The Journal of American Medical Association just did the first study, which is ongoing, that has told us anywhere between 10 to 20%. We lost 1 million Americans in COVID. 1 million of our brothers and sisters died of COVID. Between 10 and 20% they believe died because they were low literate. So it has serious implications on the health side. What does it also mean practically? It means that you struggle to fill out a job application. It means you can't fill out your SNAP or your WIC application. It means that you probably can't read a medicine bottle. It is also, we're about to have an election. It is inextricably linked to being able to vote. You probably cannot, you're not voting because you can't read a ballot. We also know if you live in a community that has higher literacy rates, you're more likely to vote. So this is it has a serious implications for misinformation, disinformation, but also really challenging folks, millions of Americans, that they can't even exercise their right to vote.
Right. Disenfranchisement, disinformation. You're speaking to a health and science editor, so I love the implications to what we just have gone through and what we're still going through for many people. Our country has grown so divisive that even books have become politicized, with growing pushback against efforts by schools to address the long whitewashing of US history. How do you think that efforts to ban books in schools will impact a child's joy or love for reading?
So I'll answer it a little differently. We don't really engage around the book ban issue, but our deep and long-standing partner who's here in Chicago, the American Libraries Association, Tracy Hall was just named Time 100 Women of the Year, and so Tracy is leading that charge, and we are blessed and grateful for Tracy to be a part of our national effort, which I'll talk about in a minute, where we see some solutions. But let me take a different angle on answering the question. Every child should be able to see themselves in the books that they read. It is empowering, it is engaging, but also if we're going to break the cycle of low literacy, every child needs to see a book that represents them. And we know when we do that, we are successful of that child, by the time they're in 4th grade, actually being on grade level reading, so we can break the cycle of low literacy. So that's what we're concerned about, making sure that books represent our society as a whole. And we're bullish on getting those out. And if you go to our website, they're free for parents and for kids, and it's every color in the rainbow, and every kid that lives in this country is represented.
Every
All of
family
our curriculum.
representation? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm heartened. I have a 10-year-old son, so it's nice to see much more representation that's out there, if not in schools, at least in libraries, than there were when I was a kid.
100%.
So really important work. So can you talk a little bit about pockets of hope and where in this country you're seeing some potential solutions for increasing literacy rates?
Yeah, so let me take a minute to back into that question. So I mentioned we did the first ever economic study that we know of. There's probably a study that was done in the 70s or 80s, but not for a very long time. So we know that if you raise everyone in the United States up to just a 6th grade level, not a GED, not an AA, not a BA, not a master's, just to 6th grade level, this study that we commissioned with Gallup and the principal economist, Dr. Jonathan Rothwell, told us that we could gain $2.2 trillion in GDP, or about 10% of our GDP. That is conservative. We actually think the article was peer-reviewed by other economists. It's probably double that. And so why is that 2.2 trillion important, or that 10% of GDP? Because it's about equity, it's about dignity. It's not just about the GDP. It's actually about an individual person and their family-sustaining wages and their incomes. So I'm going to break that down, because this whole endeavor is about economic mobility. If you are at a 6th grade level, you essentially make about $65,000 a year. And for a family of 4 in the United States, that's considered a family-sustaining wage. If you're essentially between a 3rd and a 5th grade level, you make about $48,000 a year. If you're 3rd grade and below, essentially, you make $34,000 a year. I think most people in this room know that $34,000 a year is at the poverty line. So it is not just dollars and cents, but it's about being able to have family-sustaining wages so that you can live your life with dignity, or we like to say, so you can be a full parent, worker, and citizen. So those dollars and cents, that economic study mattered. And the reason why, we didn't do it to be cold or to leave the human piece out of it. In fact, it was for the exact opposite reason. This field is underfunded and under-researched. And when I say field, I mean the field of literacy, not the field of education. Literacy is actually considered the stepchild of education. I'm not talking about K-12. Of course, we're talking about K-12 because it's related to the child in the household, and then the parent being able to have a good job and a family-sustaining wage to take care of that child. The child does not live in poverty on their own. They live in poverty because their parent lives in poverty. That's why the study was so important. The study was so important so that we as a country can recognize that their individuals, our brothers and sisters, are living in poverty. Everybody's saying, hey, the gig economy is so great. Well, what we found is that if we go through this downturn or this recession gets any worse than it already is, those people that have 3 jobs are typically making about $100,000 to $110,000 a year, so they're getting by. Life is good. Well, as soon as the economy goes down any further, those gig economy folks who we believe and pretty much know are at below a 6th grade level, they're going to be in real trouble. And so that's why an economic study, putting the light on that, matters for the individual, mother, auntie, grandma, whoever is head of that household. If we believe in pulling people out of poverty, we have to pay attention to it from an economic issue, from an economic issue. And so that's why we put the spotlight kind of on that piece, if that makes sense. And so the hope, I'm coming to it, and I got
We have 5 minutes, so
I got
wanna make
plenty
sure
of
you
time.
get to it.
I got plenty of time. I can do it in 30 seconds. The hope. This is a challenge and an opportunity. The opportunity is that we see everybody. Again, why the study? Because the study has helped us see people who are low literate, to know about the problem that needs to be on the hearts and minds of the American people. It's not. We know about climate change, we know about food insecurity, we know about housing insecurity. Where you're food insecure, you're housing insecure, you have poor health outcomes because you live in a low literate household. It is inextricably linked to solving all the problems that we want to solve, because we know it's correlated to your income and to family sustaining wages. So for us, hope was to say, this can't go on. Too many nonprofits are working in silos, doing their own thing, but we're not working together. So what we did about a year and a half ago was we brought together about 200 experts around the entire United States, literacy experts, academia, philanthropy, corporate sector. Corporate sector has to be a part of solving this problem. It cannot just be us. The other reason why we did the economic study, corporate sector was not at the table at all. And believe it or not, nor is philanthropy. So it was our spark, if you will, our poke to bring them in. So the hope is we've now gathered this group. It's called the National Action Plan to Reduce Low Literacy in America in the next 5 years. Last fall, our current First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, launched this national initiative, which is now a thing. It's an entity, which is housed at the Barbara Bush Foundation, called All In. It is the Adult Learning Literacy Impact Network. And through that network, we seek over the next 5 years to reduce low literacy in America. Made up of all the national literacy organizations. Dollar General Literacy Foundation is a major partner, along with about 10 or 12 other Fortune 100 companies that are a part of that. And we couldn't have, I would say, had this hope if we weren't able to bring all those folks to the table. So looking at the problem from a national perspective, to solve it as a grass tops organization in service to grassroots organizations working on the ground, for example, here in Chicago, and bringing the national resources, funding, know-how, and even a national campaign will shed more light and awareness around the problem. So that's where we see hope.
Is there any place in the country that's actually making progress?
So we just started. It was just launched in October. We are going to do a place-based.
Like, what are the actual actionable things that people can do?
So the last panel just talked about place-based. We know place-based initiatives can be very successful. So that's the exact approach we're taking. So we're starting in a pilot in Charleston, South Carolina, in the Low Country, with all the major corporate partners, with the state, with the governors, with legislatures, with school districts, you name it. Everyone's at the table. We've created an ecosystem in the last 18 months. And so what are our best bets? Our best bets is to meet people where they are in the community that are low literate. That means where they live, play, pray, and work. So we're going to be working with workforce. We're going to be working with school banks, with food banks, churches, everywhere. We're also going to do a national campaign. And then
What do you do with this? Like, what do you actually do in church? What do they?
Tutoring, upskilling programs, credentialing, so that you can get a family sustaining wages. So let me give you an example. Boeing works in Charleston, South Carolina. Amazon works in Charleston, South Carolina. Volvo works in Charleston, South. BMW. We just heard about the upskilling program here in Chicago. We're going to do exactly the same thing. So get low literate folks, help raise them up, credential them.
Like, teach them how to read
Digital literacy,
while they're at
teach
work?
them how to become digitally literate. People can't put their kids on Zoom. So we have a training curriculums just in digital literacy, so then they can actually do their job through digital literacy, health literacy, civic literacy, financial literacy, so they're able to be upskilled so they can actually compete and do those jobs and hopefully even have higher wages.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing all this with the audience.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. This programming has been amazing so far. So the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, wanted to be with us today. He had plans to come to Chicago, but then his schedule, of course, got in the way. So we sent Aaron Haynes, the 19th editor-at-large, to him in Washington, D.C. last week. We're going to take a look at their conversation on why he sees abortion as an economic mobility issue and how he's using his historic role as the second gentleman, to be an ally on issues of equality. We're going to start the video.
Second Gentleman Emhoff, welcome to the National Portrait Gallery. Thank you so much for joining us for our summit and in this beautiful space.
Well, thanks for having me. Hello, everyone out there.
Yeah, well, I guess we should look at this beautiful exhibit, I Dream a World. Some really incredible Black women in here. That Septima Clark starting us off here, champion of democracy, champion of citizenship. So a good harbinger for this conversation, I
Definitely.
guess. Shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay.
So I love this museum.
Same.
And
One of my
walking
favorite
around,
places.
every time I come here, you see something new.
Yeah.
And it's just living history in a way people may not have seen it before.
Agree.
Especially exhibits like this.
Agree. And I think this is somebody that you've met before. I think Cicely Tyson here, you and the Vice President knew her personally.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, one of her favorite people in the world. One of just an icon, you know, growing up, watching her, Sounder,
Yes.
autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, and so many others. Kamala VP, my wife, just
Yes.
loves her so much, and we actually have her book that she wrote and publicized right before she died.
Oh, wow.
It's in our living quarters at the residence,
Wow.
where only we can see it. So
Right.
because she's just so inspired by her, and it has a real place of honor where we spend a lot of our time.
Yeah. Well, certainly a very powerful, just her representation and her pioneering, a powerful example for y'all. And so that is pretty
Definitely.
special to have her.
What a picture too.
It is. It's beautiful.
Again, we were saying as we were walking in, these are images of these iconic women in ways we haven't seen them before.
Yes.
Which is great art.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
I gotta bring my wife here.
Sonia Sanchez, such powerful words and such a beautiful portrait of her too.
Oh, wow.
Now this one is one of my favorites, Myrlie Evers. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
incredible
Look at
portrait
that.
of
Look
her.
at the power
Yes.
in that pose.
Yeah, I mean, her gaze, the flag, it's
And still a patriot. I've been talking
Yes.
about this a lot, where even if you talk about things that need to change and you're talking about justice and civil rights, it doesn't mean you're not a patriot.
No,
In fact,
it's not
one of the most
incompatible.
patriotic things you can do. And holding the flag like that is just exactly what I've been saying.
yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point.
The power.
Such a good point. I think another example of just what you're talking about is Dorothy Height, just her amazing leadership to try to make, you know, a freer and fairer and more equal society for everybody,
Yeah,
right?
both heroes of Kamala's.
Yes.
Interesting. I'm seeing in both pictures the pearls.
Yes.
Which, of course, is
Yes.
it's interesting.
Yeah, I love this portrait of her. Just so many Black women who, in their own way, contributed to our democracy and our society in such profound ways. So, what an exhibit.
And thank you for bringing me here.
Thanks for showing up.
This is great.
Well, it's good to be with you again, Mr. Second Gentleman. I actually haven't seen you in about a month when we were together on the continent for your wife's first trip to the continent, the Vice President on the continent. But you also were doing quite a bit over in Africa. I was actually kind of sad that I didn't get to see more of your agenda because you were really busy. Can you just kind of share some of the highlights from your trip to Africa? Some of the young women and girls that you met with, what you learned on that trip.
Well, great to see you here. The trip was amazing. I focused on mostly gender equity type issues, women's empowerment, economic issues, and an amazing event on clean cooking, which is all tied into the environment, tied into lifting up women, lifting them out of violence. So we did Fisher Women in Tanzania. I did an event with the NBA. We were just chatting off camera about in the playoffs, but there is a massive presence of the NBA in Africa. I think they tell me about 60 players in the NBA right now have African roots.
Right.
And so it is a huge thing. And I did it the first ever women's basketball clinic sponsored by the NBA in Ghana. There was music. We had a music event. I did there's a teen show called YOLO in Ghana, which I did a roundtable there, our big town hall. I did a legal event because I'm also passionate about access to justice.
Yeah.
And we did that. So it was all the things that I've been trying to talk about here as Second Gentleman, whether it's lifting up women, gender equity, access to justice, pushing back on hate. We had a little bit of all that on the trip, but it was also to lift up the work of the Vice President and the administration. You know, we went in tandem, and this was a part of the United States effort to show that close partnership and connection on the continent, and you know, meeting with the leaders there, which I was also a part of with her, was really, I think, very powerful. And also to see her, you saw a little bit of what I saw, to see a woman in power,
Yes.
a Black woman, part of the diaspora in power, was very compelling. To see the thousands of people lining the streets,
Yes.
especially a lot of little girls with the flags and the Kamala shirts and the joy, and it was really, really powerful to see.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about that, because there were a lot of those kinds of moments, and you all were there together, and you got to see kind of up close how she was leading, but also experiencing that time on the continent. I think about her visit to the Cape Coast in Ghana. You were there with her for that moment. What can you tell me about that moment and just kind of what that was like for her?
It was very personal, very searing, very emotional, infuriating.
Yeah.
To walk through that factory of evil, to hear about women being raped and then being forced to carry those children, and those children being ripped away from them, and those women then being thrown on those horrible, they're not even ships, and they're just stuck together, often dying on the way over, never to see those children again, those children were then made to forced to work there. And to experience that with her was just really intense. And to watch her then go out there in front of the world and talk about it. And she had some prepared remarks, and I think I literally saw her rip them up and say, I need to just go out there and talk about what I saw, and just to get out there with the passion and the power, and again, the fury about what she saw and the way she connected it to what's happening now. Was such an intense, incredible moment that I know I'll never forget.
I really confronting that past was such an important part of that trip, but also really talking about the future, right? The future of Africa and how that's tied to so many young people that are there on the continent, and also just the idea that Africa is going to be such a huge part of the world population, and what that means in terms of gender equity, economic mobility. Having that conversation on the world stage felt just kind of very important for her and for you.
It was, and she gave a massive speech in Ghana, thousands of people, and she did. You heard her say many times, the average age 19, and several years from now, fully a quarter of the world's population will be on the African continent, and that's why it's important to have these connections, these relationships that are also focused on the economy, focused on clean energy. She focused on public-private partnership. She brought billions of dollars of investment to the continent through private sector leaders on this trip. Just the one-on-one meetings that she had with the leaders, and the meetings that we all had through the state dinners and my engagements with them as well. Very important. There was also, when she was in Zambia, one of the other great moments was to go back to where she was as a
Yes.
4-year-old, where her father, our grandfather from India, was a dedicated public servant, was there in Zambia in the 60s.
Yeah.
And her aunt was also a resident in the
Yes.
hospital there. And to go back to the plot of land where he lived,
Yes.
the house wasn't there, the hospital where her aunt worked, and then to go back to the assembly hall where there's this amazing picture of her as a 4-year-old,
Yes.
and now as
Here she
Vice
is,
President
yeah.
of the United States.
Greeting the first woman speaker.
Greeting that
There.
speaker was, again, one of those other moments that I know I'll never forget. It was just incredible.
Yeah. Well, I want to turn back to domestic issues and what's happening here in the United States, because, you know, we're having this conversation as we are approaching kind of the 1-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision that ended federal protections for abortion. And I know as second gentleman, you had the opportunity to really kind of see the intergenerational reactions from the women that you love the most, your mom, your wife, your daughter, you know, kind of what can you tell me about that moment, just reflecting on what that moment was a year ago? What was your reaction to that decision?
Yeah, well, you know, we had the leaked just draft, so we kind of knew it might be coming, but people were hoping that it wouldn't be that way. So Vice President, my wife, was flying on Air Force Two somewhere, and the news hit, and she called me right away, and it was something like, Dougie, they did it. They actually did it. And I could hear the anger, but also the purpose. You know, I'm going to do something about this. And then within minutes, our 23-year-old daughter, Ella, who, you know, she's doing her thing. She hasn't really been, you know, pinging me all the time about politics.
Yeah.
So for her to weigh in, it was literally like, Dad, ... you need to do something about this. She's 23. And then shortly after, Barb, my 82-year-old mother, who was one of those women in the 60s and early 70s, who was passionate about equal rights and abortion rights and all the things that make women, you know, equal citizens. And her reaction was something like, how dare they? How are they going to take something away that I've fought for and we all fought for and I've had for almost 50 years? And now all of a sudden, Ella's not going to have this?
Yeah.
You need to do something about this. So this is not an issue, though, that I just, you know, was awoken to. This is something that I've always been passionate about as a lawyer, just someone who believes women are equal and need to be treated that way in all facets. And I was just outraged. And again, as the first man in this role, having the microphone, being a lawyer, I said, let's go. We need to do something. So literally, that within day or days, or even that night, we were out speaking at NARAL. I was having meetings. I was talking to doctors. I was doing all this work behind the scenes. I wrote, just to know what the impact could be. And now, of course, we know how horrible it is. It's a healthcare crisis. You see the stories of women being denied healthcare, and it's horrendous.
Yeah.
I wrote an article for GQ about it, so I just wanted to be out there in front as a man in this role, saying this is not just an issue for women, this is an issue for all of us. It's about fairness, it's about equality, it's about fundamental rights, and it's about making sure women aren't less than. They can't be.
And it's also about economic mobility, right?
Absolutely.
It is an economic issue, abortion, and helping people understand that connection. How are you also helping to communicate that?
Yeah, I'm trying to just tell the truth, which is, in fact, that when you lift up women, you lift up the economy. So when women are fully able to participate in our democracy, fully able to have childcare, family leave, paid equally, advancement in careers, and ability to have health care, whether it's when they're having a baby, whether when they need to make decisions about whether to have an abortion or not, whether all those things are connected. and it's impacting women's ability to fully participate in our economy, which is not fair. And if we fixed all these things, childcare, family leave, equal pay, more advancement, access to reproductive freedom, maternal health care, all these things, it would help everyone. So even cynical people like, why do I care about that? Well, you should, because it's the right thing to do. And if you don't, there's all this objective information that's factual that if we do all this, it's going to lift up our entire economy. And it's going to, again, help women fully participate. And that's what we need. It's just the right thing to do.
Yeah, I see you using your role, using your platform really to be that ally who is showing up on gender equity, but also for the LGBTQ community, the Jewish community, the Asian American community, right? Both experiencing, horrible incidents of hate in our political climate in this country right now. Can you talk about really just kind of how you're using your role as second gentleman for allyship and helping people to understand the relationship between kind of our shared fate and gender and economic mobility?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. I'm an entertainment lawyer from LA, and I come from a community that's very open, that works together, lives together, is kind to each other, celebrates differences, and there's power in that. And so in this role, I'm just bringing what I've always believed to the table and just trying to find issues that are just messed up. Like when you're denying people the ability to be who they are, love who they are, love who they want to love, marry who they want to marry, read what they want to read, teachers teach what they want to teach, all these things. You need to speak up and speak out and call out those who are staying silent, those who are doing it, but also those who are staying silent. And being the first Jewish person ever, which I couldn't believe, married to a president or vice president, I really felt a heavy responsibility to speak out against anti-Semitism, which then led me on this journey of speaking out against hate of all kinds, and whether it's Asian hate, Islamophobia, all these things that we're seeing. And now it's led me to speaking out all over the world on this, having meetings. We're working on a plan to combat anti-Semitism that the government is doing. It's all connected. So, and that means we all need to stand together in allyship and work together. It's a cliche, but a hate against one is a hate against all. And we need to recognize that and come together and push back. And I'm going to keep leaning in on this as much as possible because we need to do it, unfortunately. Hate is on the rise. Yeah. There's an epidemic of hate, anger that we need to push back on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you are learning a lot in this role that you are having to build as you are in it. I mean, you are the first second gentleman that we've ever had, and there was really nobody that you could turn to for advice on how to do this job. But I wonder, just if you, as you think about what you've learned over the past few years, there will eventually be a second gentleman.
Better be.
What would be a piece of advice that you would have for the next second gentleman?
Our First Lady, Dr. Biden, was the same advice I'd give, which is, it's almost impossible to tell you what this will be like because you won't believe me. Because it's so different, some of it's so surreal that it's hard to explain it until you live in it. 2, you have to be yourself. You have to be who you are. You have to be your true authentic self and communicate to people in that way, because people, don't like phonies, and you can help your spouse and help the administration by just leaning into these issues authentically, how you are, and that would be my advice. But I've been saying, people say, what do you want your legacy to be? And I always say more Kamala Harris's. We need more women in leadership. So we need more men to support their partners who are looking to maybe throw their hat in the ring for elected office or try to go for that promotion or or whatever it is, because we just need more women in leadership all over the place.
Well, we at the 19th certainly agree with that.
Yeah.
So you were the exact right person to join us here for Summit to talk about this issue. Thank you so much, Mr. Second Gentleman, for
Thank you,
being here.
Erin. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Erin, and thank you to the second gentleman. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our next performance. Jaylin, if you're here, there she is. Jaylin is a groundbreaking composer, electronic musician, and producer. If I can brag about her for a second. Oh, Erin's always in my ear. Jaylin was a steel worker and went from being a steel worker to being at Paris Fashion Week, like performing for the runway shows of like major global fashion houses. She was also just named a finalist for the 2023 Pulitzer Prize in Music, which is an incredible honor. So, yes, please join me in welcoming Jaylin. And this is a special performance. Do you need this mic for any reason?
Hi, everybody. I'm so used to being in different spaces. First I just want to say, as a woman, a Black woman, 35 years old, I think one of the greatest things I got to witness is realizing how important the matriarch elephant is on this planet. And the reason I say that is because nature is a great teacher, and matriarchs are crucial. And for my generation, being 35, they're dying off now, our grandmothers, and I feel like wisdom is, I think where we're at right now in this world, wisdom is crucial. Intuition, crucial. And I think intuition is not something that I feel like can be taught. I think it's something that you have to have, again, elder, and particularly I really feel like woman who can teach you and guide you, because sometimes the things that grandma can say is so simple, but but in this complex world, it makes so much sense, and I feel like we're missing it heavy, like really, really heavy. There is an absence, and I feel like I needed to say that. I don't know what moved me to say that, but I feel like it was really needed. And I also, doing this, thank you all, 19th for just having me, and you all being here, because every person in this room is crucial, to making this planet that we on run. I mean, like, for real. And as an artist who performs and, going around the world, and, those accolades I greatly appreciate them, but they don't mean anything if what I do and what I present and represent myself comes from the heart, and it doesn't mean anything if it doesn't tell, the truth and reflect, time that we in now. Like, I very much believe, like Nina Simone said, your art should reflect the time. You should, represent yourself in some way that, isn't just, kind of futile, really, but, in this loving way, because it's just, I don't know, it's just such an absence of so many things. And I feel them, especially as a musician, but I don't want to get into all that. I'm gonna play. I just felt like that was important to say. So, but thank y'all for, again, for being here. I'm extremely grateful, and also know, spiritually speaking, this is also, I mean this in the most non-suicidal way. This is, I know this is my last go-round in this realm, and I used to be afraid to say that out loud, but I already know this is my last go-round. So this is it. For as far as coming back, I know this is my last one, so it's crucial for me with a lot of things. So I take a lot of things seriously, a lot more than I feel like I did in my past lives. So yeah, just wanted to say that. I'm gonna go through the titles because I think it's gonna be easier for me to do it like this because I did give a list, but the first track is called Speed of Darkness. This is a track that's actually on my next album. I won't tell you what it is because I have to, I gotta wait. Y'all know how the politics go, so, but I'll just give you the title. Okay, so let me get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jalen. You're amazing. All right, so just one question. Tell us what it was like when you found out that you were a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize.
So I was actually landing from Amsterdam. I had just got done doing I was in Amsterdam for the String Quartet Biennale. I was one of the composers. I had done several pieces I had done for Kronos Quartet, and then I've worked with, just several different quartets, Ragazza Quartet, and I had got home, I landed, and I remember getting this text from Emily saying, "Congratulations on your being a Pulitzer Prize finalist." And I was on the phone with my mom, and I said, "Ma, I just got this really weird text." And she said, "Well, read it to me." So I told her what it said, and she said, "What?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I think I'm gonna text her back because I think she texted the wrong person." So, so I text Emily back, and I said, kind of just like "Oh, thank you, maybe one day, but I think you texted the wrong person." Emily said, "No." And so I was like, "What?" So I went and I go and I look on the internet and I type in my name and I type in Pulitzer, and I was like, "Hey, that's my name. That's not that's weird." So and I remember and Emily sent me the link and then I'm like I'm in the airport bawling, crying, and then I remember my mother, she's like, "Get it together because they're gonna think something's wrong with you." She's telling me this as she's crying, and so I was stunned, and I think when it happened, I really for me it was a moment of I really wanted doing for me. If I could dedicate that to someone and getting it, I would really dedicate it to Nina Simone, because when you're told you're not something and you are, and to be told that you're just a jazz musician when you knew you were a classical trained pianist and you knew that's tough. Super tough. And I dedicate that to her, and I feel like it's full circle because I definitely know what it's like to be the least of these. Being told that I was mentally, declared mentally retarded at 4. And yeah, just so many things. But she really just enlightened me in so many ways, and that was when I got older, but I wanted to thank, really her. And then also too, last person, then I'm gonna get off the stage, just recently, he and I have developed a relationship, and that's Philip Glass. And he told me, he loves to tell me that he's 50 years older than me. So, but one thing he told me to do is to take everything in stride. He said, "Feel everything you feel." He said, he's very proud of me, and that means a lot to me. So, that's one of my favorite composers and somebody that inspires me a great deal. And, I just wanted to just say thank you. And again, thank you to the 19th, and thank y'all. And just for real, thank you to the Pulitzer Board for even considering me. And, I'll just continue to do my best like always. And just thank y'all again.
Thank you, Jalen, for sharing your story and your art with us. I am Amanda Zamora. I am the 19th's co-founder and publisher. And before I turn things over to my colleague, Chabeli, I wanted to remind you to sign up for one of our breakout sessions if you have not done that already. We have gathered a really incredible group of experts to help us dive deeper into a few finance topics: getting out of debt, building generational wealth, accessing capital, and building a mutual aid fund in your community. So right after this conversation, we're gonna take a brief break, and then we're going to separate into smaller groups to hear more from our experts and each other. As you're listening to this next conversation, think about what topic you're excited to learn more about. And when you're ready, our team can help you sign up at the registration table right back in the corner. So without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Chibeli Carrasana, the 19th economy reporter. Chibeli.
Hi everyone, how we doing? How we feeling? We're almost there. Well, I'm Chibeli Carrasana. I'm the economy reporter here at the 19th, and I'm really excited to close it off today with this amazing conversation with 4 incredible women who are going to be leading our workshops a little bit later. So my job here today is to give you an intro to them, learn a little bit about what they're doing, their background, and just get you excited about these workshops, get you some practical information that you can use, which I think will be really useful. And so here with me today, we have Vivian Tu. Vivian is the CEO and founder of Your Rich BFF and your favorite Wall Street girly, if you've ever seen her videos on Instagram and YouTube, where she is educating Gen Z and beyond on financial literacy. She's also a former Wall Street trader. Abby Scanlon is the director of the Access to Capital Program and Services at the Women's Business Center here in Chicago, and she is helping small business owners who are trying to access capital, giving them practical advice and doing that really important work. Hi, Abby. Athena Valentine Lent over here is a finance columnist with Slate, and she's also the author of Budgeting for Dummies, which you might have seen around here, her book. She also runs a personal finance column called Money Smart Latina. And finally, we have with us Trina Reynolds Taylor. She is the co-founder of the People's Grab and Go, which is a mutual aid fund developed during the pandemic here in Chicago. So I'm really excited to talk with all of them. And, you know, for me in writing about this subject, I'm often struck by how often folks talk about not getting access to financial education and literacy either at school or at home. That's something that comes up again and again, in particular for women, women of color, and LGBTQ+ folks. And so I always like to start these conversations kind of getting at the experiences that people have had in their lives that led them to this work, because it's critical work and it's work that many communities do not have access to. And so I wanted to start, if you could each sort of briefly tell me a little bit about what brought you to this work. Was there, you've each recognized that your community needs access to this information. Was there a moment or moments for you where you said, I need to be in this conversation and there's something that I can bring to it? And I'll start with you, Vivian, if you wanna kick us off.
Yeah, so I started my career as a trader on Wall Street, and I certainly did not come from this very financially literate background. But when I left Wall Street, I moved to a tech company, and all of my new colleagues were like, hey, can you help me rebalance my 401k? What investments are you buying? Which healthcare plan did you pick? And it was interesting to me because they didn't seem to have that financial literacy and that piece. But even worse, I had gone on a date with this guy who worked a similar job to me when I was on Wall Street. We were making about the same amount of money, and he showed up to this date tricked out, like Rolex, Gucci loafers, Ferragamo tie. I was like, wow, this guy's looking good. And then he let it slip on the date that he had 5-figure credit card debt. So not only did I realize that people outside of the finance industry didn't have this knowledge, people in the industry itself didn't have this knowledge. And what's really disappointing to me is that we spend 12 years in school learning how to do math and a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Great. When have you guys ever used that? It would have been nice to learn basic financial literacy, because the first time I filed my taxes, I thought I was going to prison. And I think the one skill that all of us as adults in society need, we don't teach. So now I am trying to do that for the next generation of young people, just trying to make talking about money feel so much easier.
Thank you for that. And I'm taking the date didn't go well, didn't go far?
We went on a second date because I'm stupid, but it didn't go anywhere.
Abby, what about you?
Oh, okay. So I kind of fell into banking, right? Like, I never really thought I was that girl that did the numbers. I was terrible at math throughout all of high school, the whole thing, right? Because that was kind of stuck in my head, right? So you live with that thought and so forth. And so for some reason, I went into banking, right? Does not make any sense, but was in banking for quite a few years. And I have been in different neighborhoods, right? North, south, and all throughout Chicago. So I definitely saw some discrepancies between all of my different clients. And so wanted to take basically my superpowers, is what I call it, from my banking world and bring it to a nonprofit organization that could definitely help women and empower them through their own economics, basically, right? So their own businesses. And so that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I'm helping our small business owners, especially women, because it's the Women's Business Development Center, but we obviously help everybody. But helping them realize that they can empower themselves through their small businesses and then also impact their communities, which to me is really important, right? Because I feel like for women, we're really kind of the weavers of the communities, right? And so with us being strong and us having empowerment with our finances, then we can help the rest of the community. So
Thank you for that.
I know, I'm like, what mic do I use? So what brought me to this field was I had already had an interest in personal finance. When I was 18, I got turned over to check systems. And it was because my parents never taught me how to open a checking account. And we lived in rural Arizona, and my parents would have their ID photocopied to like cash registers at like grocery stores saying, do not accept checks from this person. And so I was like, okay. And so I got a second chance, and like I got my checking account, and about 10 years later, I'm teaching at a Title I school, right? And in my class, there's just nothing but Latinos and Latinas, and because it's Arizona, and now this time I'm in Phoenix, and we were doing junior achievement, and they have a quiz when you do junior achievement, saying, it's just kind of to test the kids, like how much they actually know, and all my kids are in 8th grade, and they come to me and they say, Miss Lent, we need help with a question. And I was like, sure. And they're like, what one of these is not true? And so I'm looking, and it's like, do you pay tax on food? So I'm sitting here trying to figure out, like, how do I explain to them that if it's like prepared food, you pay tax, but if it's not, you don't? And they go, oh, never mind, we know. You don't pay tax because it's an EBT card. You don't pay tax on food. And I said, I don't have an EBT card. And they're like, well, how do you buy food then? And I was like, I use a debit card. And they're like, oh. And then it just got around the classroom. They're like, Miss, like, can you really buy food with an EBT card? With a debit card? And I was like, yeah. And then I just looked around and I saw nothing but like myself. And I was like, okay, I need to step it up. I need to start Money Smart Latina, because I don't want the next generation of Latinas to be on EBT or think that that's how everyone buys food and that's the way the world works, because it's so much bigger than their neighborhood.
Wow, awesome. Thank you so much. Really, I came to my career as an organizer with the Black Youth Project 100. I was working on the campaign Naira mentioned earlier, called the Say Her Name campaign, related to the murder of Rekia Boyd by off-duty officer Dante Servin. And once I realized the barriers within the institution of accountability around policing, I joined the Invisible Institute, where I'm currently the data director. I actually investigate the intersection of gender-based violence and policing. We use data science to really identify the shared experiences that we have so that we can discuss, police misconduct in a more expansive way. But, really I came to mutual aid through my lived experience as a Black woman from the South Side of Chicago. I have benefited greatly from the informal networks of community care, the cooperation and reciprocal energy, period. And so when in June of 2020, during one of the largest uprisings, the largest racial uprising in the US, occurred, and Lori Lightfoot said, you know, it's too dangerous for folks to feed folks, you know, for the staff to come into schools to serve lunch or breakfast. Me and my friends went to the school that was down the street from our block, from my house, Burke Elementary, and started feeding folks. And Naira was a part of that work as well, was a huge force on the volunteer team. But it really was like a rapid response effort that was built on the values and principles that I already had, that solidarity that already existed. And I saw it as a means of plugging in where I fit in, you know what I mean? Thank you.
Thank you, Trina. You know, what I love about your work too is you recognize the need your community had, and you then showed up for them in the places that you needed to show up for them, right where they were needed. And so I think that really speaks to the important work that all of you are doing. I'll remind y'all, if you have any questions, you're hearing them chat, they're all incredible. Make sure to send it in so that we can ask them your questions directly. I am wondering, you know, I want to acknowledge that the barriers still in front of women of color, LGBTQ plus folks, are persistent and are significant, right? They're not going away, even though we're doing a lot of important work in that area. And so as you're advising your community, as you're talking to your communities, I'm wondering, what are the things that are coming up again and again? These are the problems that are really not getting eroded. Trina, I want to start with you on that one.
Ooh, okay. Well, you know, housing, shout out to the person who mentioned it earlier. Housing, childcare, you know, literacy, these are all things mentioned today which play a huge role in accessibility, right? These are issues that have a rippling effect. But then also, you know, when I think about trauma, which Tracy Hall recently defined as like the repeated injury to a wound, right? It's really reoccurring, and it's something that I think often folks struggle to discuss because there's a lot of shame around the things that, you know, are traumatic experiences. And so, you know, that's something that's huge that I see as folks don't really often like to acknowledge or discuss these types of issues.
Thank you for that. Athena, what about you? What comes up for folks when you're chatting with them?
So women face a wage gap, right? But Latinas have the biggest wage gap out of all women. And so Latinas statistically make 54 cents to every dollar that a white non-Hispanic male makes. And so a big contributor of that is in the Latino culture. Women are the caregivers. And so if something happens or the kids get sick, they're gonna stop, they're gonna take time off of work. Now, if you have an ailing parent, it's also expected in Latino culture that you take care of your parents when they're old. So if you have an older parent that needs help with assistance, they're not healthy, they need a caregiver, it's very common for women to just go ahead and quit the workforce, right? So a lot of people don't know about the Family Medical Leave Act. And so the Family Medical Leave Act gives you a lot of time off without fear of losing your job to take care of your family member. And why that is so important is you do not lose your job, you do not lose your status, you're able to come back and jump back in. And every time a woman, general, leaves the workforce, they set themselves back economically, and they tend to earn less because they're not being consistent and having those additional raises. So I really encourage and I really talk a lot about the wage gap and how FMLA can actually close that.
And we should say too, FMLA is unpaid leave guaranteed. We are one of the few nations, I think there's only 6 others, that do not have a national paid leave policy, and that has been really an enormous barrier for a lot of folks.
Yeah, a few states actually do have it.
They do, that's right.
And so, so nationally it's unpaid, but now a few states do have it. And because it is unpaid, it's a really good idea to take disability, so you leave the workforce to help your, to help subsidize your income.
Like with many of these topics, the states are really the ones that are really pushing forward, and we're seeing a lot of movement there. That's something that we've definitely followed a lot at the 19th. Abby, what about you for business owners? I mean, we've talked so much about, all of these programs that came out through the pandemic that were specifically targeting small business owners. But still, the numbers are dismal in terms of access to capital, particularly for women.
Well, it's not just women. I mean, it's just, I feel like a lot of disadvantaged communities don't always know what's out there, right? So if I can kind of like summarize it all, it's really about, you know, everyone's awareness of what is going on out there, right? Like we always talk about, you know, did you know this program? Like I'll have, you know, sat with a business owner, you know, a year into the pandemic, and they still didn't know what was available to them, right? So for me, it's really about being aware of who is in your community that can help you. But in terms of like barriers themselves, honestly, I just feel like it's the basic traditions and the basic concepts that we're still, you know, pushing forward, right? Like right now they're trying to figure out, without getting too political, but, you know, they're trying to figure out how to deal with inflation and et cetera, right? They're still trying to use the same methodologies, right, to solve that problem. That's not gonna help everybody, right? And it's the same thing when it comes to business, right, and accessing capital. There are so many barriers when it comes to accessing capital for business owners. For instance, credit score, right? That is the main gatekeeper for most businesses if they want to get traditional lending at a financial institution. And unfortunately, you know, business owners, they may have like great credit history, like payments may be on time, but you know, what makes up a credit score is utilization, right? And if they don't have capital to infuse into the business, they're going to be using their credit cards. They're going to be borrowing from friends and family. I mean, cash flow is not going to be there. So credit scores could get tanked just because of the utilization, and that's a huge impact on your credit score, right? Sorry, I didn't know if I got too into the weeds there with that conversation, but essentially there are so many things that are out there that people still are looking at that are very traditional methods, and I really just feel like, you know, we need to kind of change it up and reevaluate how business owners, especially startups, because startups are the ones that are really, really hurting, could really, really gain or get that money infused into their business.
This idea of an economy that wasn't, you know, written or created for women, for people of color, for LGBTQ plus folks, never written that way. So none of these programs really are targeted until they're written with those folks in mind. Vivian, you have generational wealth is the ultimate goal, right? That's the goal that, you know, folks want to be able to build that. And so for you, what are the barriers you're seeing?
Yeah, so I've lovingly dubbed my audience as the leftovers, because historically financial services has only catered to male, pale, and stale clientele. And I find that a little troubling, because when you close your eyes and you think about every person you have seen on CNBC in the past month, and they all look like Jim with his white button-down shirt and his Patagonia vest, and you start to internalize that is the type of person that deserves generational wealth. You start to think, like, if I don't look like that, I don't get to have all of these shiny things that people have spoken about. So I think the importance is finally talking about personal finance through a contextual and nuanced lens. It's not just your, you know, not saving up enough for a down payment. It's, hey, if you are a Black homeowner, if you are in a LGBTQ plus relationship, when you go to get a mortgage, there's a potential chance that you could get a shittier rate because of who you are and what you look like. It's talking about, hey, you know, it's not just about remembering to invest. It's that, statistically speaking, women are actually much better investors than men. However, we are taught to be perfect instead of brave. We are told that if we don't know how to do something 100%, we shouldn't bother doing it. And that's why all of us like to apply for those LinkedIn roles when we fit 9 out of the 10 bullet points, but our male counterparts apply when they hit 3 out of 3 or 4, and they're like, who better than me? And so I think it's just really providing that nuance and that context that you are not just bad with money. It's how we speak about men and they're growing their wealth and their power, and then with women, we talk about you're you love to splurge, confessions of a shopaholic. And I think it's just really changing the narrative around who gets to be financially stable, who gets to be financially well off, and why that should totally change in the future so that people who look like all of the very diverse faces I'm looking at in this room, it's for all of us. All of us deserve to be good with money.
That's right, claps for that, for me. So to that end, I'm wondering if there's a tip, a tool, something that you think is most critical for folks to overcome some of these barriers. And I have, Vivian, I want to ask you about this since we're on a good roll here. With a lot of folks are wanting to invest, are looking at that world and saying, I want to approach this, but stocks, bonds might feel daunting to them. They don't know where to start. And that's what I was hoping you could tell us. What do you tell them? Where do you start?
I tell everyone that you should know 85% of day traders lose money over a 1-year period. You are not smarter than the guy who has every access to every resource sitting at his desk from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. at that hedge fund. You're not. You just don't have the ability to invest as much time. You're not going to be able to cherry pick the perfect investment. But time in the market beats timing the market and picking the perfect investment every single time. It is so critically important to just start. Even if your baby steps are, hey, I'm just going to open up a IRA or a Roth IRA and I'm gonna put $10 every single month. I'm just gonna cut out Starbucks twice that month. I'm gonna put $10 in and I'm gonna invest it in an index tracking ETF. So instead of buying one stock, I'm gonna buy an entire basket. It gets you in and it gets you comfortable. And worst case, if you genuinely think, I don't have the time, I don't have the effort, just use a robo-advisor. Take a quick quiz about your money goals and then let a robot pick what investments are for you. But truly, the biggest regret I have about my own investment process is that I didn't start earlier, and that is every single investor's biggest regret. Don't let it be yours.
Thank you for that. Athena, I want to ask you a question that we got from one of our audience members, and I think this is a really important one. They're asking, what advice would you give people with student loan debt? And we know Black women, Latinas have some of the highest student loan debt in this country, who are trying to build wealth as they start their career.
First of all, you're not a bad person if you have any type of debt. Debt is morally neutral. And a lot of people, especially finance experts, think that you should live off beans and rice until it's gone. And I am here to tell you that's impossible, it's unsustainable, and that you need to have a balanced life. Hence why I wrote a book about budgeting. So with your student loans, I want you to go ahead and I want you to look at the ones with the highest interest rate. You need to pay off your loans with the highest interest rate because that is how you're going to save more money overall. You waste a lot of money on interest during your student loans. So that's why it's really important to do that. Another advice I would give to someone is to look to see if you qualify for any type of student loan forgiveness. And so I'm not talking about Biden's plan, but I am talking about the different loan forgiveness programs that there actually is. And so there's public service loan forgiveness. There is loan forgiveness for teachers. There's loan forgiveness for someone if you just go and you teach math for so long. So I really encourage people to go ahead and look at that. Now, if all of that isn't an option to you, to get a lower interest rate, you can go and you can refinance your student loans with another lender. They're in some hot water right now, but SoFi is an example of people that do that. Let's see. And then if you sign up for automatic payments for either federal loans or private loans, they will actually take down some of your interest rate, so you're not paying money on that. One key thing I want everyone to remember, though, is that if you have federal loans and you go and you refinance with them with a private lender, then you're not eligible for that type of forgiveness. So it's kind of picking the less of two evils, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Abigail, I want to ask you for business owners, right? Business owners who have a good idea, already have a business plan, but are really struggling to get banked, to get investors, are at that impasse. How do you guide them beyond that point?
That is a really great question because I get that all the time. So it is really tough. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sugarcoat this for anybody. But for startups, again, this kind of goes back to what I had said earlier. This is why we need to change and shift how we actually do lending. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to do it. It's going to have to take a whole village to do it. But, for startups that are looking, use the resources that are out there. Use your community too. There are some programs that can help. In fact, like for us at the WBDC, we have kiva.org. It's a national program. You basically crowdfund for your capital, right? It's kind of like a hybrid of a GoFundMe plus a lending platform, right? So again, that's community driven. But unfortunately, for a lot of startups, it is going to have to be a lot of thinking through why you need the money and your cash flow, right? And it goes back to your financial literacy piece. It's like, why do you need the money, right? You have to be very, very thoughtful when you're in the startup stage because capital is going to be very kind of hard to come by, unfortunately, right? So the best thing that I can tell you is reach out to organizations that are out there like us that are free and can kind of walk you through some of the other resources that are out there, because there are some. A lot of times people are like, oh, what about grants for startups? They are out there, but they're not, they're very niche-y, right? There's a timing issue, like they're only open for a few weeks. Sometimes it's very driven by the industry, and there could be other parts of it too, right? But I don't want people to just think like, oh, I'll just get a grant and start my business, right? Like there's just so much to it, so that's why we have organizations like ours and other SBDCs that are available so that business owners at the start can get that education and partnership, right? To walk them through, to help them out, to get the basics and the foundations of running a business available and taught to them. Because that's, honestly, I feel like that's why a lot of the businesses kind of fall apart at the first 2 years, right? They didn't know what they were doing. They felt like they were at an island on their own, and that's not true. There's so many other female founders and entrepreneurs out there. Like, look for them. They are available, and I mean, they're at your chambers. They're at, my organization. They're out there. You're not alone. You're not alone.
Thank you. I mean, the education piece, right? That's something that I'm hearing from all of you is getting that access early on is so, so critical. And, we know some folks get that access and their families get that access their entire lives, and some folks don't. Trina, I was hoping you could give us a little bit of education too on mutual aid funds, because sometimes the answer is in your community.
Absolutely. So when, that day, the next day when we were like, oh, we're going to go to the school, I hit up my friend Dominique James. She's actually in her third year of law school at Yale, but at the time she was not in law school. There was my homie Matt Muse, who is an artist, works with Young Chicago Authors, and then also my good friend Jihad, who was a BAM counselor, which is a program that focuses on young Black men's development. And I really believe that when thinking about mutual aid, we must think about our relationships, as mutual aids are about, it's about building relationships within your community, but a big part of it is like when you're getting started, leaning on the relationships that you already have. We're already very much in community with folks who share our passions, who share our values, and who have an interest in getting plugged in. And so, when it's all said and done, if you want to get started, I think the first thing you should do is call a friend and say, what's up, and I really hope that just hearing me today encourages you to take a moment, think about the ways that you can plug in, use your unique gifts and talents to support mutual aid funds that are already in existence, or maybe think about building something your own.
And can you tell us a little bit about the impact of the People's Grab and Go? Because you had a huge impact.
Oh my goodness. Well, there were so many mutual aids that came out of the People's Grab and Go. A lot of the infrastructure for folks in Chicago to like understand like, okay, we have a space, we setting up shop, volunteers coming in and out. How do we deal with crises when someone comes up and they're clearly, having some substance use abuse situations going on? Like, how do you de-escalate? Like, there are all of these, we've fed hundreds of families, but then I continue to be in relationship with other mutual aid funds that continue to exist. There's Market Box, which is out of a church now, but they used to be out of the Experimental Station on 61st and Blackstone. There's Not Me, We, which is actually a housing organizing group that I currently work with, but we do mutual aid at Parkside Elementary, a Chicago public school in the South Shore community. And so really it's like, when thinking about, when folks are talking about like mutual aid versus charity, they often say like, well, charity is about bringing things to scale and mutual aid is about building relationships. And I would like to say that the work that we did with the People's Grab and Go was a part of the model that continues to live and breathe in Chicago, that model of that relationship building, that infrastructure, and then also continues to be a container for the families who maybe couldn't even make it to the Grab and Go, but are now receiving grocery deliveries through the Market Box program.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Thank you for that work. I had another question, but then we got this one from the audience, and I was like, oh, this is better than my question. So an audience member is asking about education. So how do we make learning about money desirable for people who feel like it's a chore, or they hate math, or they feel discouraged by the topic? I gotta tell y'all, if you asked my entire family, they would have never told you I was gonna become an economy reporter. Like, math wasn't my thing, but for me, this is really the story of people. Business, economy, that's the story of people. And so I wonder how y'all think about that, who wants to take that one on, which is, how do you make learning about this desirable for people who are discouraged by this topic, who just tune out when they hear some of these terms? Vivian, go for it.
I was just gonna say, show people what's possible. People, like the idea of like, being a millionaire, like it's so sexy. Sure,
Which
great.
she is, by the way, by 27.
They have my bio. But it's so sexy, it's so amazing, and people think that when you are a millionaire, you're able to walk down to the Louis Vuitton store and you're like balling and you're buying bags and shoes and all this stuff, and like, sure, maybe you are, it's great, I'm not. But what I will say is that the greatest thing that I've recently purchased was $6,500, and it was an all expenses paid week-long vacation for my parents. And I think it's showing people what that money, that business, that financial knowledge is going to be able to buy them, not in just material possessions, but the experiences and conveniences and improvements that it buys them, their loved ones, and their communities. That's really gonna motivate people. Because sure, your first designer bag's great, but what about being able to tell your parents their house is paid off?
Yeah.
What about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, don't worry, mom's got you, we're gonna pay for school. There is no better satisfaction than being able to use money as a tool to make your life better, and by showing people what is possible, get them invested in the long haul.
Yeah, thank you. Abby.
You know what, I have to 100% agree with that, because so I do a lot of financial education for my business owners, right? I teach them how to do their financial statements, to read their financial statements, because a lot of them, they've been business owners for 5-7 years and they still don't know how to look at their P&L, right? It is not a sexy topic, right? Like sometimes when I teach how to read your financial statements, I feel like I should be juggling fire just so I can get everyone's attention, right? But when you do show them how to read your P&L and that they are not profitable, they're like, oh, wait a minute. What? I thought I was. And oh my God, why is my overhead such a huge margin on my like what is going on? When you show them what it means to look at the data and to look at the numbers and how to apply them, then they get excited. Like, oh, I need to fire that accountant, right? Because I am paying him or her way too much, right? it's the application of all of these numbers. That's how I got excited because, again, I'm with you, Jabali. I'm like, I wanted to be a ballerina. I wanted to be a backup dancer. And no, I'm doing financial statements and balance sheets and teaching people how to price, their product. And if you're the product, everybody, if you're a business owner, you are the product, you got to price yourself the way that you are valued, right? Don't undervalue yourself. We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just think that showing them, what all of it will mean and how that comes out in the end is always helpful. The why.
Thank you for inspiring me to change my coaching rates right after I get off the stage. I think another key thing with personal finance is to, this sounds silly, but talk about it more positively. For example, people hear budget or they hear like budgeting and they like freak out. It's just kind of like an internal like cringe. And so I like to say a budget is you telling your money where to go instead of your money telling you where to go. Because it is possible to pay for fun things in your budget. I have in my budget Starbucks, and I get Starbucks about 2 to 3 times a week because that's what gets me out of bed, and that's what I like. And I think I'm bougie in my home office, and I should have a latte. So yes, I got cut off, and I was like, okay, I'm done talking.
That was a great ending, honestly.
Yeah.
I should have a latte.
Go have a latte, everyone.
Y'all, this has been amazing. Thank you all so much. You're going to get to hear from them a little bit more at their workshops and from Sheena as well. And I just want to thank you all so much for such a great day. Thanks for being with us. I'm going to pass it back to Amanda Zamora, who's going to get us ready for our workshops. Thank you.
Thank you, Chibeli, and to all of our speakers today who have been incredible. One more round of applause for everyone, all of our performers and speakers today. A really fantastic day. Before we break into workshops, I want to also thank everyone who has made this week possible, including our founding sponsors, the National Women's Law Center and the Stardust Fund, and our supporting sponsors, the Barbara Lee Family Foundation and the Tory Burch Foundation. We'd also like to thank our national media partner, The Washington Post, as well as our local partners, Block Club Chicago, CityCast Chicago, City Bureau, and the Chicago Independent Media Alliance. To our hosts today, Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism. To all of our viewers watching at home, and the rest of the summit will not be live streamed, unfortunately, but we will share the great information from today's workshops with you soon. But thank you very much for being a part of the 19th Represent Summit this week and for supporting us throughout the year. Now for the Chicago crowd. It's time for our breakout sessions. We've got much more wisdom to unpack from this
Francis Brooklyn, for the first time in program history, has beaten LIU. And then he knocks Buckley off the ball. Shot in! As Palaniuk and Winkler collided, Winkler still down. St. Bill gets it to Pasco. Pasco, the shot, and the goal! Jack Pasco!
Peter Mesrar. And it's in! The run up. He gets it in. Save made! The Terriers win! St. Francis takes down preseason favorite LIU.
St. Francis Brooklyn will attack the backup goalkeeper with a nice feed in here, and it's a shot and a goal!
Sent in, right to the waiting King, but it gets loose, and a goal! The Terriers!
Malone, coach, Familia Melendez, good. California. Oh, the block for coach. That was a beauty.
Big time dig, that is still in play, it's legal. And Waldinger comes through that. Look at how high that